The stars had always been silent to humanity. For thousands of years, humans looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They sent signals into the darkness. They built telescopes and listened for any sound. Nothing ever answered back until the day the Galactic Empire found Earth. The Empire had ruled the known universe for 10,000 years. 12 different alien species worked together under one flag, one law, and one emperor. They called themselves the greatest civilization in existence. Every species they discovered either joined them willingly or was forced to join. There was no third option. There had never been a need for one. Emperor Vareth sat on his throne made of crystal and bone. He was ancient by any standard, having lived for over 300 years. His gray skin was covered with golden tattoos that marked his victories. He had conquered dozens of worlds. He had crushed rebellions before they could begin. He knew how the universe worked. When his scouts reported finding a new species on a small blue planet, he barely paid attention. The report said they were primitive. They had only recently learned to travel between planets in their own system. They fought among themselves constantly. They would be easy to absorb into the Empire. Voreth sent Ambassador Thelix to deliver the standard offer. Thelix was a tall creature with 6 arms and eyes that could see in complete darkness. He had delivered this same message to 47 species. Every single one had accepted. Some took longer than others, but they all understood the truth eventually. The Empire was too powerful to resist. The message was sent to Earth on every frequency the Empire knew. It was translated into every human language their computers could identify. The terms were simple. Humanity would surrender control of their governments. They would pay tribute in resources and labor. They would accept their place as junior members of the Empire. In exchange, they would receive protection from other threats and access to Imperial technology. Admiral Park Do-hyun received the transmission aboard the United Earth Defense Force battleship called the Indomitable. He was a serious man with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen too many battles. He had spent his entire life preparing for threats to Earth. He never imagined the threat would come from beyond the stars. His second-in-command, Captain Kim Yuna, stood beside him as they read the message together. She was younger than him, with sharp features and a reputation for speaking her mind, even when it caused trouble. The bridge was silent as the crew waited for someone to speak. Do-hyun read the terms again. Surrender sovereignty. Pay tribute. Accept second-class citizenship. The words burned in his mind like fire. Yuna laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was bitter and cold. They want us to kneel, she said. Do-hyun nodded slowly. He looked around at his crew. These were soldiers who had sworn to protect Earth and its people. They had trained for years. They had sacrificed everything. And now an alien empire was telling them to give up without a fight. He turned back to the communication console. His fingers hovered over the controls. "Sir," his communications officer said nervously, "what should we tell them?" Do-hyun thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about his daughter who wanted to be a pilot someday. He thought about all of the generations of humans who had struggled and fought, and died so that their children could have a better future. He pressed the button and sent a single word in response. No. Then a V message traveled across space at the speed of light. When it reached Ambassador Thelix, the alien did not understand. His translator repeated the words several times. No, a refusal. A rejection of the Empire's generous offer. Thelix assumed there had been a mistake. Perhaps the humans did not understand what they were being offered. Perhaps the translation had failed somehow. He sent the message again, this time with more detail about the benefits of joining the Empire. The response from humanity was silence. Hours passed. Then days. The Empire waited for an answer that never came. Emperor Varath was confused at first. Then he became annoyed. No species had ever simply ignored the Empire before. It was unthinkable. It was an insult to everything the Empire represented. He summoned his advisors to discuss this strange new species. They studied the reports from the scouts. They analyzed human history, their wars, their art, their science. What they found disturbed them. Humans were not like other species. They did not form one government under one leader. They constantly fought among themselves over land, resources, and ideas. They were unpredictable. They were chaotic. And yet somehow, despite all their internal conflicts, they had survived and grown stronger. One advisor suggested that humans were simply too primitive to understand the offer. They needed time to comprehend their situation. Another advisor disagreed. He believed humans understood perfectly well. They simply did not care. This idea was so strange that the other advisors laughed at him. Varath listened to all of them. Then he made his decision. If humanity would not listen to words, they would listen to power. He would send a fleet to orbit their world. He would show them the strength of the Empire. Once they saw the might arrayed against them, they would understand their situation and beg to join. This had worked before. It would work again. 500 warships began their journey toward Earth. Each ship was larger than anything humans had ever built. Each ship carried weapons that could destroy cities in seconds. Together, they represented more military power than humanity had developed in its entire history. Back on Earth, Admiral Dohian watched the approaching fleet on his tactical display. The dots representing alien ships grew larger every hour. Captain Yuna stood beside him again. "They're coming to scare us," she said. "Yes," Dohyun agreed. "Will it work?" Dohyun thought about his answer carefully. He remembered the stories his grandmother had told him when he was young. Stories about their ancestors who had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Stories about the human spirit that could not be broken by any force. "No," he said finally. "It will not work." The first act of the greatest conflict in human history was about to begin. And humanity had already made its choice. They would not kneel. The sky above Earth turned dark with alien ships. 500 vessels hung in orbit like metal mountains floating in space. Their shadows fell across entire continents. People everywhere stopped what they were doing and looked up. Some prayed. Some cried. Some simply stared in wonder and fear. Secretary General Choi Hyeri stood at the window of the United Nations building in New York. She was a small woman with silver hair and a face that rarely showed emotion. She had spent 30 years in politics, navigating between nations that could never agree on anything. Now she faced a challenge that made all her previous work seem simple. Her military advisor, General Baek Junho, entered the room with a tablet in his hand. He was a large man with broad shoulders and a scar across his chin from a war fought decades ago. His expression was grim. "They have sent an ultimatum," he said. "We have one planetary rotation to submit. 24 hours. Hyeri did not turn from the window. "And if we refuse? They say there will be consequences." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were calm and steady. "What is the status of our orbital defense grid?" Junho checked his tablet. 6 hours until full operational capacity. "We have been building it in secret for years, preparing for threats we hoped would never come. Then we have something to work with." The world watched as Hyeri walked to the podium of the General Assembly. Representatives from every nation sat in their seats, waiting for guidance. Cameras broadcast her image to billions of people across the planet. She spoke clearly and slowly, making sure everyone could understand. "The Galactic Empire has demanded our surrender. They believe we are weak because we are new to the stars. They believe we will be afraid because their ships are many. They are wrong. She paused and looked directly into the cameras. Humanity does not negotiate under threat. We never have. We never will. Ambassador Thelix watched the broadcast from his ship with growing frustration. He did not understand these creatures. Every other species had seen reason once they witnessed imperial power. Why were humans different? He decided to try personal diplomacy. Perhaps meeting face to face would help the humans understand their situation. Shuttle carried him down to Earth's surface. He was met by a human delegation led by Han Sujin, Earth's chief negotiator. She was a young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She did not seem impressed by the aliens standing before her. The meeting took place in a simple conference room. Thelix sat on one side of the table with his advisors. Sujin sat on the other side with hers. Thelix spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. I understand there may have been confusion about our initial offer. Let me explain the benefits more clearly. Species that join the Empire receive protection from all external threats. You gain access to technology thousands of years ahead of your own. Your people can travel freely among the stars. Sujin listened politely until he finished. Then she spoke. We understand the offer perfectly. Our answer is no. Thelix blinked all four of his eyes. Perhaps you do not understand the alternative. The Empire has destroyed civilizations that refuse to join. We have weapons that can turn planets into dust. We understand. Then why do you refuse? It is not logical. Sujin leaned forward slightly. You misunderstand our position, Ambassador. We are not negotiating with you. We are telling you to leave our system. This is not a discussion. It is a statement. Thelix's translator malfunctioned. It could not process what she was saying. The concept of a weaker species making demands to a stronger one did not fit any pattern in its programming. He tried again. I can offer modified terms. Better citizenship status for humans. Reduced tribute payments. Perhaps even a seat on one of the minor councils. Sujin slid the documents across the table back to him. You are not listening. There are no terms we will accept. You entered our space without permission. You threatened our people. You demanded our freedom. The only acceptable outcome is your departure. The meeting ended without agreement. Thelix returned to his ship and reported to Emperor Vareth. For the first time in his long career as a diplomat, he had failed completely. Vareth listened to the report with growing anger. His golden tattoos seemed to glow brighter as his temper rose. They are insects, he said. They have no understanding of power. His military commander, a creature covered in thick armor plates, stepped forward. Perhaps a demonstration is needed, Your Majesty. Something to show them we are serious. Vareth considered this. He did not want to destroy Earth completely. A dead planet produced no tribute. But a small display of power might bring the humans to their senses. There is a mining colony on their moon, the commander said. Destroy it. Show them what we can do. Vareth nodded. Do it. The order was given. A single Imperial warship broke formation and moved toward Earth's moon. Its weapons charged with energy that could crack mountains. On the lunar colony, 17,000 humans went about their daily lives. Miners extracted precious metals from the rock. Scientists conducted experiments in the low gravity. Families lived in domed habitats, dreaming of the future. None of them saw the beam of light that ended everything. The colony vanished in a flash of fire and debris. The explosion was visible from Earth. Millions of people watched as a piece of their civilization was erased from existence. Emperor Vareth waited for the surrender he was certain would follow. Instead, he received something else entirely. Within 72 hours, every human government on Earth announced they were joining together. Old enemies shook hands. Ancient conflicts were set aside. Nations that had threatened war against each other for generations suddenly stood united. The United Terran Confederacy was born with a single purpose: not surrender. War. General Beak John Ho stood before the new Confederacy Council. His voice was hard as steel. They killed 17,000 of our people to teach us fear. They have made the greatest mistake in the history of their empire. He looked at each council member in turn. They have made humanity angry. The galaxy expected humanity to fall. Every civilization that watched the conflict unfold assumed the same thing. A young species with primitive technology had angered the most powerful empire in existence. Their destruction was certain. It was only a matter of time. The empire shared this belief. Emperor Varath barely thought about the human problem anymore. He had given the order to demonstrate power. Now he simply waited for the inevitable surrender. His advisors told him it would come within days. Weaker species always broke quickly once they understood reality. What nobody expected was for humanity to attack first. Fleet Admiral Yun Tai-Wu took command of the combined human forces. He was an older man with white hair and a face carved by decades of military service. His eyes were cold and empty. 3 days ago, his daughter had been working at the lunar mining colony. She had been planning to visit him next month. Now she was gone, scattered across space with 17,000 others. Tai-Wu gathered his commanders in the war room aboard the flagship Seoul. Screens showed the position of every Imperial ship in the solar system. 500 vessels still hung in orbit around Earth like vultures waiting for death. They think we are defeated, Tai-Wu said quietly. They think we will come to them with our heads bowed and our hands open, begging for mercy. He looked at each commander in turn. They are wrong. Vice Admiral Shin Ji-won commanded the stealth fleet. She was a thin woman with sharp features and a mind that worked faster than most computers. Her ships were humanity's greatest secret. They used technology that bent light around their hulls, making them invisible to every sensor the Empire possessed. For months, her ships had been watching the aliens. They mapped patrol routes. They studied weapon systems. They found weaknesses that the Empire did not know existed. I know where their forward command station is, Ji-won said. It controls all communications for this sector. If we destroy it, their fleet will be blind and deaf. Tai-Wu nodded. Can you reach it? We can reach it. But getting inside will require ground forces. Colonel Lee Min-ho stepped forward. He commanded the Special Operations Division. His soldiers were the best humanity had ever produced. They trained for years to face situations that seemed impossible. My teams are ready, Min-ho said. Give us a target, and we will take it. The plan was simple in concept, but incredibly dangerous in execution. Ji-won's stealth ships would carry Min-ho's soldiers past the Imperial fleet. They would board the command station and capture it. Then humanity would broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. The operation began 12 hours later. 3 stealth ships slipped through the Imperial formation like ghosts. Their engines ran silent. Their hulls reflected nothing. Alien sensors swept past them again and again, without detecting anything unusual. Mene Yayo sat in the cargo bay with his soldiers. They checked their weapons and equipment in silence. Each of them had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not return. Each of them had lost someone in the lunar colony attack. Each of them had stopped being afraid. The command station appeared on their screens. It was a massive structure covered with communication dishes and weapon platforms. Hundreds of aliens worked inside, coordinating the movements of the entire Imperial fleet. Min-ho's ship attached to an airlock on the station's lower section. The soldiers moved quickly and quietly through the corridors. They encountered guards and eliminated them before alarms could be raised. Years of training guided their movements. They flowed through the station like water through cracks in stone. The control room fell in minutes. Alien operators surrendered when they saw human weapons pointed at their heads. They could not understand how anyone had reached this place. It should have been impossible. Minho stood before the main communication console. His technicians worked quickly to patch into the Imperial network. When they finished, they had access to every communication channel in the sector. He pressed the broadcast button and spoke clearly. "This is Colonel A. Minho of the United Terran Confederacy. We have captured your command station. Your fleet is now isolated. We want you to understand something very clearly." He paused, making sure his next words would be heard across the stars. "Humanity remembers. Humanity will respond." The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Species that had never heard of humanity now knew their name. Empires and kingdoms and republics that had ignored the conflict suddenly paid attention. Back in Earth's solar system, the Imperial fleet fell into chaos. Their communications were gone. Their coordination collapsed. Ships that had moved as one unified force now drifted without direction. Admiral Park Do-hyun saw his opportunity. The Indomitable led the attack, followed by every combat vessel humanity possessed. They were outnumbered 5-1. They did not care. Human ships were smaller than Imperial vessels. They were faster and more agile. Their weapons were crude compared to alien technology. But the people inside them fought with something the Empire had never faced before. They fought with rage. Pilot Kang Yoonji flew her fighter straight into a gap in an Imperial carrier's shields. Her squadron followed her through. They destroyed power generators and weapon systems from inside the massive ship. When enemy fighters closed in, she led her people back out through the burning wreckage. Engineer Moon Sunwoo worked through the battle in a maintenance bay. He had been studying captured alien equipment for months. During the fight, he developed a modification that disrupted Imperial shields. Within hours, his design was being installed on every human ship. The battle lasted for 3 days. The Empire lost 100 ships before they retreated beyond the solar system. Humanity lost 40 ships. Every death was mourned. Every sacrifice was remembered. But they had one. Emperor Vorath received the news in disbelief. He had never lost a battle. He had never even imagined losing. And now a primitive species had driven his fleet away from their world. He stared at the reports, trying to understand what had happened. His advisors had no answers. Nothing in their history explained how this was possible. What Vorath did not know was that the message Minho had broadcast was being heard far beyond the conflict zone. Species that had been conquered by the Empire were listening. Species that had been enslaved for generations were paying attention, and some of them were beginning to hope. Nevoleth, a race of gentle creatures with long limbs and sad eyes, had served the Empire for 3,000 years. They contacted humanity in secret. Their message was simple. Can you truly win? General Oh Jisoo, head of Terran intelligence, wrote the response herself. We do not intend to just win. We intend to free every species the Empire has ever conquered. The revolution had begun. Emperor Vorath had lived for 300 years. He had watched species rise and fall. He had crushed rebellions that stretched across star systems. He had never known defeat until the humans came. Now he sat alone in his throne room, surrounded by the silence of his own thoughts. The reports from the Earth system haunted him. 100 ships lost. Communications disrupted. The humans still stood, still fought, still refused to kneel. He made a decision that he knew would define his legacy. He would send the Grand Armada, 10,000 ships, the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the Empire. Every vessel would converge on the human solar system. They would leave nothing but dust and memory. The fleet gathered over weeks. Ships came from every corner of Imperial space. Warriors of a dozen species prepared for what they believed would be an easy victory. The humans had been lucky before. That luck would not last against the full might of the Empire. Vice Admiral Shin Ji-won watched them coming. Her stealth ships reported every movement, every formation, every weapon system. The numbers were terrifying. 10,000 ships against humanity's 300. The math suggested there was no hope. But Ji-won had spent her life proving that math could be wrong. Fleet. Admiral Yoon Tai-woo stood on the bridge of the Seoul. His officers waited for orders. Some of them looked afraid. Most of them looked determined. A few were actually smiling. "They outnumber us badly," Tai-woo said. "They have better weapons. They have better shields. They have fought 1,000 battles before." He paused and looked at each face around him. "But we have something they do not understand. We have people who would rather die than lose their freedom. That is worth more than all their ships combined." The battle began at the edge of the solar system. Imperial ships poured through space like a metal river. Human ships waited for them, positioned behind asteroids and moons, hidden in radiation fields and debris clouds. Captain Kim Yuna commanded the destroyer Lightning. Her crew of 200 had trained together for years. They knew each other's thoughts without speaking. When the enemy fleet appeared on their screens, nobody panicked. They simply prepared. "Remember what they did to the lunar colony," Yuna said over the ship's speakers. "Remember our families. Remember why we fight." The first clash was brutal. Imperial ships fired weapons that could destroy small moons. Human ships dodged and weaved between the blasts. They were smaller and faster. They used their speed to get close where the big alien guns could not aim properly. Pilot Kang Eunji led her squadron through gaps in the enemy formation. She had not slept in 3 days. She did not care. Her fighter moved like an extension of her own body. When she saw an opening in an Imperial carrier's shield, she did not hesitate. She flew straight toward the opening. Her weapons fired continuously. She penetrated the shield and entered the carrier's internal hangar. Enemy fighters scrambled to stop her, but she was too fast. She released all her remaining missiles at the carrier's reactor core. The explosion ripped through the massive ship. Yoonji ejected at the last possible second. Her cockpit shot away from the fireball like a seed from a burning flower. Her wingman, Lieutenant Bae Sung-ho, caught her escape pod and pulled her to safety. 30 minutes later, Yoonji was back in a new fighter. Her hands were still shaking from the ejection. She did not let that stop her. She joined the battle again. This was what humans did. They fell down and got back up. They broke and healed themselves. They refused to stop fighting, even when stopping made sense. Engineer Moon Sung-woo worked in a repair station behind the main battle lines. Damaged ships limped in for repairs. His teams worked without rest, fixing holes in hulls and replacing destroyed systems. He had improved his shield disruption device again. The new version was even more effective. When Imperial technicians finally captured one of his devices, they studied it with confusion. Human technology was supposed to be primitive. This device should not work. And yet it did. It was held together with welded scrap metal and components that did not match any standard design. How did they build this? One alien scientist asked. His colleague had no answer. Humans built things that should not work and made them work anyway. It was impossible to predict what they would do next. The battle raged for 3 days. Ships exploded on both sides. Humans died by the thousands. But they kept fighting. They kept pushing. They kept refusing to accept defeat. On the second day, something changed. The Imperial formation began to weaken. Ships that had fought as a unified force started operating alone. Commanders who had never faced real resistance made mistakes. The human tactic of constant, unpredictable attacks was breaking their discipline. By the third day, The Empire had lost 4,000 ships. Humanity had lost 800. The numbers still favored the Empire, but the momentum had shifted. Imperial commanders began requesting permission to retreat. Emperor Vareth denied every request. He could not accept defeat. He could not allow these primitive creatures to beat him. He ordered his forces to continue the attack, no matter the cost. But the galaxy was watching. The Veleth had been preparing in secret. They had hidden weapons and trained soldiers for years, waiting for the right moment. When they saw the Empire struggling against humanity, they knew the time had come. They rose up against their imperial masters on 100 worlds. The Marathi followed. Then the Klexi. Then a dozen other species who had been conquered and enslaved for generations. The revolution spread like fire across dry grass. General Ojisu received reports from across imperial space. Uprisings were breaking out everywhere. Species that had been silent for thousands of years were suddenly finding their voices. She sent messages to each of them. She offered advice and coordination. She promised that humanity would stand with them. The Empire is not as strong as it appears, she told them. They have ruled through fear. Once the fear is broken, their power will crumble. Back at the main battle, Fleet Admiral Taiwu gave the order for a final push. Every remaining human ship advanced. They attacked with everything they had left. The Imperial fleet broke. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries turned and fled. Their commanders chose survival over loyalty. The Grand Armada scattered into the darkness of space. Taiwu watched them go. His face showed no joy. Too many humans had died for him to feel anything like victory, but they had survived. Against all odds, against every prediction, humanity still stood. And now the entire galaxy knew it was possible to resist the Empire. The seeds of revolution had been planted. Soon they would grow into something the Empire could not stop. Emperor Voreth stood at the window of his palace and watched his empire burn. Reports came every hour. Another system had fallen to rebels. Another fleet had been destroyed. Another species had declared independence. The structure he had spent 300 years building was collapsing around him. His advisors had no solutions. His generals had no victories. His diplomats had no answers. Everything the Empire had believed about itself was proving to be false. They were not invincible. They were not loved. They were not eternal. For the first time in his ancient life, Vareth felt something he did not recognize at first. It took him hours to understand what it was. Fear. He called his remaining advisors together and spoke words no emperor had spoken in 5,000 years. Contact the humans. Request negotiations. The message traveled across the stars to Earth. It arrived at the office of Secretary General Choi Hyeri. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. The empire that had threatened to destroy humanity was now asking to talk. Admiral Park Do-yeon stood beside her as they discussed how to respond. He was tired. Everyone was tired. The war had lasted for 2 years. Millions had died on both sides. Entire worlds had been burned. It could be a trap, Do-yeon said. Perhaps, Hyeri agreed. But we need to hear what they have to say. Not for them. For the species we are trying to free. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground. A dead moon between human and imperial space. No atmosphere. No life. Just rock and silence. Emperor Vareth brought his finest diplomats and his most cunning advisors. He wore ceremonial armor covered with the symbols of his victories. He wanted to appear strong, even in weakness. Humanity sent only 2 people, Choi Hyeri and Park Do-yeon. They brought no advisors. They carried no weapons. They wore simple clothes. The meeting room had been built just for this occasion. A single table with chairs on each side. Nothing else. The stars shone through a transparent ceiling, watching the moment that would change everything. Vorath spoke first. His voice was smooth and practiced despite his exhaustion. "We have come to discuss peace." The Empire is prepared to offer significant terms. Full sovereignty for humanity. Complete war reparations for damage caused. Trade agreements that will benefit your people for generations. A permanent seat on the Galactic Council. He paused, expecting gratitude or at least interest. Hyeri listened with a calm expression. When Vorath finished, she remained silent for a long moment. "You killed 17,000 of our people," she finally said. "You did this to teach us fear. You believed we would see your power and surrender our freedom." She leaned forward slightly. Her eyes never left his. "You failed to understand something fundamental about humanity. We do not learn fear. We learn revenge. But more importantly, we learn justice." Do-Hyun placed a small data chip on the table. He slid it across to Vorath. "These are our terms," Do-Hyun said. "Full dissolution of the Galactic Empire. Freedom for every species you have ever conquered. War crime tribunals for military leaders who ordered attacks on civilian populations." Vorath stared at the chip without touching it. "You cannot be serious. The Empire has existed for 10,000 years. You cannot simply destroy it." "We are not destroying anything," Hyeri replied. "We are ending a system built on slavery and fear. The species you conquered will decide their own futures. They will build their own governments. They will make their own choices. And if we refuse these terms..." Hyeri stood. Her small figure cast a long shadow across the table. "Then we will burn every imperial world until there is no empire left to refuse. We have fought your armies. We have broken your fleets. We have proven that your power was always an illusion. Do not test us again." The room fell silent. Vorath looked at the human delegation. He had conquered dozens of species. He had seen countless warriors and leaders. He had never seen anything like the absolute, unwavering certainty staring back at him. These were people who had chosen death over submission. They had united their entire species in months. They had inspired revolutions across the galaxy. They would not stop fighting until they achieved their goals or died trying. And Vorath understood, finally, that there was no way to defeat them. He reached for the data chip. His hand trembled slightly. Then he pressed his thumb against it, recording his acceptance. The Galactic Empire officially ended in that moment. 10,000 years of history dissolved with a single signature dot. The news spread across the stars within hours. On 100 worlds, former slaves celebrated their freedom. Species that had forgotten what independence felt like began learning again. A new era was beginning. The years that followed were difficult. Rebuilding was harder than destroying. Old conflicts between former imperial subjects threatened to become new wars. Resources were scarce. Trust was hard to earn. But humanity did not abandon the galaxy to chaos. They helped build something new. A galactic federation based on equality instead of domination. Member species joined voluntarily. Decisions were made together. No single power controlled everything. Admiral Park Do-Hyun retired after the Federation was established. He bought a small house overlooking the ocean on a quiet part of Earth. He planted a garden. He learned to cook. He tried to remember what peace felt like. He also wrote letters. Thousands of them. One to the family of every soldier who had died under his command. He told them how their loved ones had fought. He told them why it had mattered. He promised that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Years later, a journalist traveled to his house for an interview. The galaxy still talked about the human who had led fleets against impossible odds. They wanted to know his secrets. Do-Hyun welcomed the journalist and made tea. They sat on his porch and watched the waves crash against the shore. What made humanity different? The journalist asked. How did you defeat an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years? Do-Hyun thought about the question for a long time. He thought about Captain Yuna and her brave destroyer crew. He thought about Colonel Minho storming the command station. He thought about Pilot Yoonji flying into fire and emerging alive. He thought about all the ordinary people who had become heroes. They offered us peace through submission, he finally said. They thought we would trade our freedom for safety. They did not understand that some things are worth dying for. He looked out at the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water with orange and gold. We chose freedom through fire. And when the fire was done, we built something better from the ashes. That is what humans do. We endure. We overcome. We remember. He smiled, but his eyes were distant, seeing ghosts from battles long past. And we never, ever kneel. The journalist wrote down his words. They would be read across the galaxy. They would inspire species that had not yet been born. They would become part of the story humanity told about itself, not a story of perfect heroes, not a story without pain or loss, but a story of ordinary people who refused to accept defeat, a story of courage that burned brighter than any star. The universe was vast and full of dangers. New threats would come. New challenges would arise, but humanity would face them together. They would face them standing tall. They would face them unbroken.